Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Safe Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about the origins of agriculture and see if we can find some answers as to whether the question was it beer or not? So I think it's really, really interesting. Why beer, and what does all this have to do with chocolate or cocoa? So before we get into today's episode, I want to remind everybody that this episode of Pod Safe Chocolate is hosted by the members of the Chocolate Life. If you're not a member of the Chocolate Life, you can go to the Chocolate Life right now. You can click on the join button. There's always a free membership tier. There has been since 2008, but there are also paid membership tiers starting at a minimum of $5 a month. Higher classes of membership do include consulting hours and other special benefits, and there is a special member benefit program going on in the month of January that I'm going to be presenting to everybody shortly. And what else? Oh, right. You can go into the live chat in YouTube or the comments on LinkedIn or Facebook. Let me know where in the world you are connecting from, or let me know if you have a question or a comment about anything that I am saying here. Right. And with that, let's go to the post for this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, and that post is here. So for every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together a post, and this is the post for today's episode. And among other things, it has an overview of what it is that I'm doing. These are never scripted, right? But it also has the research that I'm citing over the course of this, and so that you can go and follow those links later on. I'm going to put a QR code up on the screen. If you do have access to two different devices, what you can do is you can go and scan this QR code, and you'll open the episode page on that other device. So with that, let's jump in to what it is that I want to talk about today, because I think it's really interesting. So the whole thing that I wanted to talk about is based on this video. This was the impetus. This was the inspiration for today's episode. It's a science communicator. His name is Anton Petrov. A lot of his stuff has to do with biology and space, and every once in a while there's another topic that catches my eye. He shows up on my YouTube feed, and he has this video that says it wasn't food. Human farming began for a super bizarre reason: beer, right? And it turns out, in my doing the research on this, that there is a fair amount of evidence which suggests that there is a controversy about what form of agriculture, or no, how did human societies move from being hunter-gatherers, which is a fairly low input, fairly efficient method of surviving. How did early human civilizations move from hunter-gatherer societies to agriculture or agrarian society? What was the impetus? What was the motivation? And the motivation is generally seen that using grain, domestication of cereal grains, wheat, barley, and things like that, to be able to create bread was one of the primary motivators for this conversion of early societies. And there's a bit of research that was published in the National Academy of Sciences dating back to 2008, where it says that the origins of bread have long been associated with the emergence of agriculture and cereal domestication in Southwest Asia. So in the Levant region, specifically in the Neolithic times. And so for quite some time, this has been the dominant theory. And there is a link to this research if you want to look at it directly. You can go to the post on the Chocolate Life. Let me go there. You can go to the post, and there is you can download this file, right? So or you can link to it here. Archaeobotanical evidence reveals the origins of bread. So you can go and link it if you want to go and read the research directly yourself, rather than rely just on the small piece of it that I'm showing you here. But there has been also some research, which is also um, published in 2018, which says that fermented beverages in food storage in a 13-year-old stone motors in Israel suggests that even before there was widespread adoption of the technology of baking for bread, there would have been fermentation going on, which would take grains and converting them into alcohol for drinking. So beer just meaning a low percentage alcohol, somewhere between maybe 2 and 5 or 6%. And a lot of it could have been spontaneous fermentation, which is, I think, very, very cool, right? Because that might be a connection to what is going on in in Latin America, in what is now is modern day Ecuador, around the adoption of cacao, the use and domestication of cacao. And what this research suggests, it has been long speculated that humans' thirst for beer may have been the stimulus behind cereal domestication, going back to the early 1950s. And some scholars have attributed this invention to the Natufians in the Near East. And I believe that the Natufian ritual feasting is a part of this research. One of the things that we might want to consider is why, and it is the ritual aspect of this that may have been part of the motivation. We want a beverage or something which can be consumed as a part of religious rituals, social rituals, as part of burying the dead, for example, appeasing the gods. All of these things might have been the motivation for doing this. And one of the questions that has been going back and forth among researchers is, was domestication of grains, right? So the move from hunter-gatherers to agrarian societies, what was the primary motivation? And I'm repeating myself at this point. Was it fermented beverages, alcohol, or was it beer, or was it bread? And one thing to consider here, and this is something that I've been thinking about for quite some time and talking to people quite some time, is that one way to think about beer that I don't know that it is really talked about in this. One way to think about beer is it not only preserves the food value of whatever is being fermented, but it also makes the water safer to drink because the alcohol is going to be killing microorganisms. And so there is a sort of a double whammy associated with alcoholic fermentation that could have been one reason why this is done. We can certainly preserve the food value of the grain by drying it out, right? We not only grow it, but we have to dry it out. But with fermentation, that preservation step is a part of the processing step. So that could be one reason. And I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that the notion of preservation could play a part in this? I've been looking at the research and I haven't actually seen many people talk about that as a motivation. By the way, that's another reason for thinking about wine. It's a way of preserving some of the food value of grapes while producing alcohol, which makes the water or the juice which is used to produce the wine safer to drink as an alternative to just drinking water. And we know that in modern times where we have documentary evidence that people preferred drinking beer, people preferred drinking dilute wine because it was safer to drink than the water that they had available to them, because it wasn't fresh, it wasn't contaminated by human waste products, by manufacturing processes, other manufacturing processes. So beer and wine were safer to drink. So let me know what you think about that hypothesis as part of the motivation for what is going on. But I think it's really fascinating that there is these two different competing hypotheses around whether or not it is making bread, right, or brewing. And one of the things which I think hasn't been shown is that the centers of origin of this throughout what is the modern day Levant region, right? It doesn't mean that these two different approaches could have been motivations for different cultures at this time. So it could be that some cultures were pursuing bread making, and some cultures were pursuing brewing. Um, what does this all have to do with cocoa or chocolate or anything like that? What I want to do is I want to go and take your attention or point your attention to this book. It's called 1491. It was written by Charles C. Mann. I got my first copy, oh, the first edition, probably about the time it was published. I was introduced to it by colleagues. I think it was just before I went to Bolivia for my first trip in 2010, although I'm not entirely sure that that's the case. And one of the things that the book, 1491, does, you can see the subtitles, New Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus. We have this idea that prior to the arrival of Europeans, that the Amazon rainforest was pristine, that there were very, very large tracts of the rainforest that never been visited by humans, right? And it turns out that a careful look of that suggests the inverse, actually, that there are very few places in the Amazon, Orinoco, in the South American rainforest, the Mata Atlântica in Brazil, for example, that weren't visited by humans 10, 12,000 years, or beginning 10, 12, 14,000 years ago. That you can walk through the rainforest and you can see where the hand of man has been, and of pre-European men has been, in terms of guiding, among other things, agriculture. Now, one of the things that I learned it was a second trip that I made to Ecuador. This would have been back in 2005. Was that much of the biomass of the forest, right, it is constantly recirculating between the leaves on the trees and the ground, right? And so the leaves fall; they're very, very quickly converted into compost, and the minerals are extracted and they're returned to the trees. And there aren't a whole lot of fruits which are in the trees, which deliver, a broad nutritional profile, right? And so a lot of the nutrition is in animals and in the rivers and streams. And so humans are really good. If you wanted to survive in those times, you need to be very aware of what was around you. And we forget often that, pre-Europeans, that the people who lived in many parts of the world were actually incredibly sophisticated plant breeders. And one of the things that Mann suggests in this book, 1491, and in his follow-up book, 1493, and I can't recommend anybody who is interested in the history of agriculture and the history of the peoples of the Americas in the years leading up to the arrival of Europeans and in the years following the arrival of Europeans, to go take a look at this book, 1491, and its companion book, which is 1493. And there are links if you want to purchase the book. They're both Amazon and affiliate links. But if you're looking for something to add to your shelf that will incredibly enhance your knowledge of the regions in which cacao originated, these are two books that I would say that were certainly foundational, changing my understanding. We tend to overlook the fact that there was this huge population collapse after the arrival of Europeans and the introduction of smallpox and other diseases that nobody had any kind of protection against. And so literally we're seeing like 95% of the populations just disappear within 50 to 100 years or so. We think of lost, abandoned tribes that have never seen the hands of man or never seen modern man. We think about technologies which are no longer viable. When you don't have enough people around, it becomes a battle for survival, and there are lots of things that you give up. So taking a look at cacao and other plants, especially hearts of palm, as it turns out. So one of the things which is interesting, and I did some research, and it turns out that I had remembered this. I don't have my copies of 1491 and 1493 handy; they're both in storage. But I did ask an LLM to summarize the argument for human intervention in the breeding of hearts of palm in the Amazon River basin. From the perspective of what it is that Charles Mann was talking about in 1491 and 1493. And so it turns out that there are quite a bit of evidence to suggest that what we think of as modern day hearts of palm was not a naturally occurring species. The hearts of palm was deliberately bred from some tree plant, some palm, by selecting varieties and crossbreeding them in order to be able to deliver a specific result that could be transplanted by people as they were exploring, doing their business in the rainforest. And we find also that this idea, bam, I need to go share this. So I did use an LLM, and here's the LLM talking about hearts of palm. I will cut and paste some of this text into the post for today's episode. So here's the parts of palm episode. And it turns out that, there's a lot of evidence for other kinds of use of domestication and cultivation. So we think about maize. So 9,000 years before present is the BP. And that date is 1950, from 1950, pre-1950. So we find maize cultivation in southwestern Mexico, 9,000 years ago, potatoes in the Andean highland, 5,400 to 3,600 years ago, and other grains from 7,000 to 2,500 years ago. We forget, or we may not have ever been introduced to the idea that, how many different varieties of potatoes are there? How many different varieties of chilies are there? How many different varieties of quinoa are there? How many different varieties of tomatoes are there? There's the people who lived thousands and thousands of years ago were incredibly sophisticated breeders. They knew a lot about what it is that they're doing, right? But it takes some work to take maize and ferment it into alcohol. It was done. Potatoes, it can be done. Was there potato beer? By the way, if you're not aware, the whole idea of distillation, of taking a plant like agave and turning it into something like tequila or mezcal, that didn't happen until after the arrival of Europeans, who brought with them stills. So distillation technology didn't exist. So if I'm fermenting a grain like maize, or I'm fermenting a grain like wheat, I'm drying it, I'm milling it to a fine powder, and then I'm allowing it to ferment using natural yeasts and bacteria that are in the air. Obviously, we want to drink it after the yeast converts the sugars into alcohol before bacteria converts the alcohol into acetic acid. But it was something that these people did. Now in Latin America, so in Ecuador, where where we find cacao, what we find is that the cacao pod, actually, if cacao pulp ferments spontaneously. Cacao pulp is very high sugar, and there is a lot of, hold on just a second. I'm doing this live, but I'm smelling something, and I want to make sure that it's not something which is accidentally burning in the other room. So excuse me for just a moment. I will go and take a look very quickly to make sure that, okay, nope. Not entirely sure what is generating that smell, but I am back. So if we go and take a look at the history of research into, into the use and domestication and the history of cacao, what I want to do is I want to point you to this article. This article is listed in the resources for today's post. This is research from the last half dozen years or so. It's a revisited history of cacao domestication in pre-Columbian times, revealed by archaeogenomic approaches. There's an author on this paper. I believe it is Francisco Valdez. Here's Freddie. Anyway, I had an opportunity to meet with Dr. Valdez when I was in Ecuador in 2022. I saw a presentation that he made about the history of the use and domestication of cacao. He was among the team, and this primary author, and this Claire Lano is also members of the team who discovered the oldest archaeological finds for the use and domestication of cacao. It is in an area called Santa Ana La Florida, also known as Palanda. It's in southeastern Ecuador. And we find that roughly 5,500 years ago, that there is archaeological evidence for the use and domestication of cacao. And it is thought, right, by taking a look at the residue of vessels in which the research team has looked at, that it is most likely that what they were doing is they were fermenting the pulp, perhaps with the seeds in it, and just opening up the pods, pulling out the seeds on the central stem, the placenta, putting it in a bowl, maybe adding water, maybe not, and then just allowing it to spontaneously ferment. It would quickly turn, because of the high sugar content, into alcohol with very, very little intervention, other than perhaps stirring it occasionally. Was it used for ritual purposes? Right? There's no direct understanding of why it was done, right? But it became an important part of culture, and one of the drivers of the domestication. So domestication, did that mean breeding? These civilizations were really, really good at doing that sort of breeding. We find around the time, maybe sometime earlier than what's going on in Ecuador, with the production of, or the use and domestication of cacao, that we have this long program in Mexico of breeding this little grass called teosinte into modern day maize and all the different land races of maize that exist today. Another thing to think about is there is related research that is done here, which talks about not only the use and domestication, but the migration of fine flavor cocoa. It says Nacional, from Ecuador into other places in the Americas. And again, the link to this research is in today's post. Let me show that to you. The link to this research is in today's post. And there's an overlap of some of the researchers on this with the other work that was being done in Santa Ana La Florida and Palanda, right? And so if we go take a look at the supposed history, right? So we find that in South America, we find that potatoes were being cultivated about the same time, so 5,400 before present, whereas the earliest origins of cacao use and domestication were 5,500 years before present. That we have in other places, amaranth would have been a part of it. The quinoa would have been both of those would have been grains that would have been cultivated and bred for specific purposes. What were they doing with them? So were they grinding up in a grain and making a bread with them? Or were they grinding up into a grain and making alcohol with them, a beer with them? Or would they have been doing both? And when you think about it, it's a kind of interesting kind of thought. Is like, oh, if I have something that is fresh, so I've got a fresh grain or a fresh seed or fresh nut, or could be meat or fish. I mean, there are only a couple of things that you can do with it if you want to preserve it. So one of the things you're going to do is you're going to dry it or smoke it. And then would it make sense if I've got cocoa seeds, they're now beans, we think about it, cacao seeds that are now beans, after I get done with the fermentation and I drain off the alcohol, the liquid, I mean, generically in Peru, it's called chicha. So lots of beverage. Chicha morado is purple chicha. I have been in, southeastern Peru where, the chief asked his wives to chew on local grains and then spit them into pots and allow that to naturally ferment. Not, I can say that I tried it once because I didn't want to be rude to the tribal chief, but it's not something an experience that I want to go and enjoy. And if anybody else had the opportunity to be able to have that sort of traditional kind of chicha, let me know. I'm just curious as to what your thoughts were on it. But to what extent did alcohol play a role in the drive to domesticate, right, and use a wide range of crops, agricultural crops, not just in the Americas, but in the old world, not just in the New World, but and in the old world? And what is the value of those things? Might the motivation been for rituals and feasts and things like that? And what are the other foods that might be available to people at that time, which could have driven them? So, we can think of, what are the sources, for example, of caffeine? So in the Americas, we have got, yerba mate, tea. We have guayusa, a form of tea. We have other forms of caffeine. There are only very small amounts of caffeine in cocoa, but there is theobromine, which is another stimulant. We are told from the history, Sophia and Michael Coe in The True History of Chocolate, that that there were people, so non-royal members of society who were involved in long-distance travel, so moving things from point A to point B, members of the military were consuming cocoa beans, right, because it gave them energy. Like, right, if you're chewing on a fresh coca leaf, another thing that was done in other parts. But if you don't have a whole bunch of sources of caffeine, then focusing on a source of caffeine or theobromine would be a really interesting thing to do. So, guayusa, mate, guarana, these are things that we know today, and we see why they are used. And cacao fits into that group of plants. What are the hallucinogens that are available? So in Latin America, so specifically in the Amazon, you might have, you do have ayahuasca, and its history goes back. Would ayahuasca and its connection to shamanistic medicine and other rituals been more powerful in the Amazon than cacao? So I don't know what the cacao origin myths are specifically with respect to South America, but when we come up into Mesoamerica, specifically the Olmec, Toltec, Maya, and Inca, they have this much more advanced cosmology where cacao plays a very important role, right, in the origin myth. Where did the world come from? Where did people come from? And why it was revered, and why in those societies it was elevated away from use by just regular people, but would have been the social consumption or the ritual consumption of alcohol among larger groups of people that would have driven the use and domestication. Because the evidence for transforming cocoa beans into a beverage, right? We have good evidence, which goes back through Inca times, perhaps late Maya times. But what was the motivation for the Olmecs, Toltecs? What was the motivation to move cacao from Santa Ana, La Florida, over the Andes to the coast, and then transferring it up into Mesoamerica and into what is now the modern day United States. I mean, they found cocoa beans and cacao residue at Chaco Canyon in New Mexico near the, I suppose it's the Colorado border at that point, although it could be Utah. I'm not, well, no, it'd have to be the Colorado border given the nature of Four Corners. Um, so there is this, there is this motivation going on, and going back and forth and understanding what is going on in the old world and what is going on in the new world gives us a clue about the importance of these agricultural products. Now, there's still a lot of work that needs to get done to research and understand the importance of the specific important ritual importance, cosmogony, when it comes to understanding, or cosmology, when it comes to understanding the origin of the world and things like that. But it looks like, based upon relatively recent research, that it might have been the search for alcohol, which led nomadic societies, which led hunter-gatherer societies to stay in one place, right? And start deliberately cultivating cereal grains. It might have been the reason for deliberately cultivating cacao trees in the wild, not necessarily the reason for, well, you find hearts of palm all over. And so it would have been a crop that would have been above ground, relatively easy to forage for and process. It's done fresh. It would supplement whatever meat or whatever game you were able to consume at the time. It would stay in the tree, and so you didn't need to preserve it. You could just cut it. You could just cut a palm down and harvest it when you needed it. Lots of value, which would mean that, in the transition from hunting and gathering and agrarian societies, there's this really interesting middle ground that we need to take a look at it. And this simplistic view that we have, I think it's an overly simplistic view that we have of the way that what kind of technology was available to people before the arrival of Europeans. What were they capable of doing? What was their level of sophistication? What was their layer of culture? What was their culture? We know that it was very high in some places, right? And goes back many, many years. So the classic Maya, pre-Maya, the cultures, their agriculture, what is they were capable of doing. I mean, not too much before the arrival of Europeans, the Inca Empire and the extent of its spread. There a lot, and some of the architecture of these places just quite remarkable, right? But that understanding, that sophistication, that knowledge, that awareness, that control that the technology of breeding and agriculture gave to these peoples cannot be overestimated. I mean, it might be that the process of nixtamalization of maize, so is soaking the maize in this lime solution, which made the pericarp come off a whole lot easier and made the protein in the maize more bioavailable, could have been the most important invention that made it possible for a most important agricultural invention in the New World, which made it possible for a relatively small group of people to be able to feed a very, very large population. Right? And cacao, and that's the point that I wanted to make with today's episode, is that cacao, because it spontaneously ferments. We know that monkeys are interested in the stories of drunk monkeys. We know that humans knew about this, going back 5,000 or more years. And to what extent, right, was it one of the drivers of people deciding that what they're going to do is stay in one place, grow communities, and rather than just lead a nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle, moving all over the place. And for me, and this is the point that I want to make with this, is that we think of cacao, we think of chocolate. Um, that's it. We think of cacao, we think of chocolate, right? There are some derivatives. So right now, people are looking at cacao and they're saying, "Oh, can I just capture the juice and we can have fresh juice, or can I take the pulp and the juice and convert it into vinegar, or can I take the juice and ferment it?" So there are cacao wines. There are cacao beers. I mean, my first trip to Bolivia, we just had gathered cacao juice and put it into a bottle, was a 1 liter or 2 liter soda bottle, and left it out for 24, 36 hours and then put it in the fridge so it would not continue to ferment. And you have this fizzy, very, very bright, just really, really refreshing. There's sugar in it. There's theobromine in it. So it has um, that sort of that stimulant in it, which is different from caffeine, and it makes a wonderful beverage on a hot Amazon, when you're in a hot Amazon day. It's just a fabulous beverage, right? And so that we think of cacao today almost entirely as chocolate, but that's a relatively modern transformation, right? What were the uses of cacao, and what prior to the technology of drying and then roasting and then grinding on a metate? The transformation of cacao as a seed into a beverage, right? Um, think about that for a moment when you think about the cacao tree and the cacao bean seed and the cocoa bean, that our modern use and our modern understanding of it is relatively narrow, that there's this fascinating historical connection, right? Going back through pre-recorded history, dating back at least 5,000 years. It may be that this is the first archaeological evidence, because it's a group of hunter-gatherers who got together and formed a community, an agrarian community, where they're cooperating in some respect to do the domestication part of it, which may or may not have included breeding, right? But our oldest archaeological evidence of this, for only 5,500 years, we don't know how far back in history humans were opening up pods, right? Pulling the pulp, the seeds off the placenta, putting them into bowls, and just letting them ferment naturally, and then consuming the alcohol as part of a daily energy drink at the time, or was it a part of a ritual or some other feast or some other aspect of the life of the community? And that's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about that, is get outside of your head, get outside of chocolate, think about what cacao might be and how it might have had an influence on the people living 5,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago, in the rainforest. Um, the origin story is one that we don't know a whole lot about. And if you know of more research, right, which talks about these things, please send it along to me. If you are a member of the Chocolate Life, and again, I want to remind you that there is a free membership of the Chocolate Life. If you are a member of the Chocolate Life and you're logged into your account, there is a member discussion at the bottom of every post. So if you have some research or some anecdotes or some place you'd like to point me, perhaps the name of a researcher that you know of or heard of, you can put it in the member discussion. If you're not, right, you can go to the comments on LinkedIn, Facebook, the chat on YouTube for this post, and you can put them in there. So if you do go in there, I will respond to them, and I will add things that I learn, new things that I learn into these posts. I, right, if you do purchase a copy of 1491, if you do purchase a copy of 1493, again, these are Amazon affiliate links. So there is no charge to you. There's no additional charge to you. You will be supporting the Chocolate Life if you do that. But this episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, a relatively short one, like all episodes, um, is supported by members of the Chocolate Life. This is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. And what I want to do, let me see if I can move this out of the way a little bit. Yeah, let me put me down here. What I want to do is point out a couple of things if you're not a regular visitor. Number one is in the top area here, it says that the January all-member AMA, Ask Me Anything, has been moved to Sunday, January 25th. I'm going to be traveling on the 18th, so I'm going to move the AMA. If you are a member, right, even a free member, you will get a link. And you can click on that link, and it'll be in the November member newsletter. So sign up today. You will get the November member newsletter. I haven't sent it out yet. And if you want to join me on Sunday the 25th, it's a 90-minute call. You can join at any time. And you have any question about cocoa or chocolate that you'd like to ask me, I will answer your question. Sometimes it's just a one-on-one. Sometimes there are more people involved in the conversation. But this is something I've been doing since I reset up the Chocolate Life back in on Maven, not on Maven, on Ghost in 2019, 2020, something like that. So it's been something I've been doing quite regularly. The other thing I want to point out is that there are less than 5 days remaining. If what you'd like to do is you'd like to purchase an early bird ticket, so discounted ticket for CHOCOA 2026, which is in Amsterdam in February. There's a link here you can purchase, right? And this is a drink. There's no affiliate or other kind of relationship between me and the people in CHOCOA. There's no, other than the discount, you can sign up until the 12th. So, it's 6 days. All right. So anyway, so you can learn about what the discounts are if you are interested in doing that. So this is something that I do on a regular basis, which is to let people know about special offers. And the place that I do it is I do it on the homepage of the Chocolate Life in this section up here. All right, so you can go take advantage of those, today. And that's it for today's episode. Let me know what you think. Go into the comments. Right, and whether you like this, thumbs up, like on all the things that you can do on YouTube or wherever it is that you're watching from. And if you would like, you can go send me an email. You can send me an email at submissions@thechocolatelife.com and let me know a topic that you'd like me to cover in a future episode of Pod Safe Chocolate. And if you do that, I will let everyone know that you were the source of the suggestion for that episode. And with that, I want to end the stream as I do for every single one of the streams by observing, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun. Oh, no. One more thing. If you're interested in the Craft Chocolate Challenge, right, you can go and sign up and submit, just sign up by the middle of February. So you've got a month, and then the deadline is a week later. But if you're interested in entering into the Craft Chocolate Challenge for 2026, submissions are still being accepted. You can go to craftchocolatechallenge.com. There's no E in it, Craft Chocolate Challenge and Chocolat. And you can learn more about this. I will be doing, an episode very shortly about the Craft Chocolate Challenge and what it's all about. And now that I've said all of those things, I want to say thank you to everybody and remind you, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everyone, ciao.